entitled this lecture Literary Elements, Poetry Terms. The main focus here will be on modern poetry and its focal features. First of all, I shall shed light on some general tips that will help you assess a poem. Then I will present the main literary devices used in poetry analysis. I will conclude by referring to some poems that best exemplify the modernist trend. After listening carefully to the present lecture, you will be asked to analyze at least 2 modern or contemporary poems of your choosing. How to analyze poetry? To start with, how would you define poetry? Poetry cannot be pigeonholed into a single meaning. There are as many definitions of poetry as there are poets. William Wordsworth, one of the founders of English Romanticism, conceived poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, recollected in tranquility. This means that the source of poetry is emotion channeled by our thoughts. Poems do not come out of the blue. They are the product of many influences which affect the ways in which writers create, and the filters through which readers assess their literary texts. Poets' lives are paramount to grasp their works. There is a direct connection between their social life and the kind of literature they produce. Delving into their biographical background may thus hold some key to comprehending their creations. You should also relate texts to their cultural and historical contexts. This helps situate them within their literary tradition. The social, cultural, and historical contexts comprise various factors such as the life of the poet, other works written by the same poet, the event that gave rise to the poem, the language used in the poem, the setting of the poem. To begin your analysis, read the poem aloud at least twice. Decode its underlying meaning. Pay attention to the rhythm. Look for techniques. Consider the poetic form and structure. In a nutshell, the social, cultural, and historical elements help to use context clues as a reading strategy. Thus, readers can construct the meaning of literary and artistic works. Nonetheless, the poem itself should remain the focus of interest. Now let us have a closer look at the terminology of poetry. Poetry terms. First of all, repetition. Repetition is a device which includes repetition of the letter, word, phrase, or paragraph. It adds rhythm to the poem, thus giving it musicality. Example: break, break, break on thy cold grey stones, O sea, by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Meter. Meter is a regular pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables that gives a line of poetry its rhythm. Scanning, also known as prosody, is the process of annotating the poem with symbols. Foot. Foot is a measuring unit in poetry, which is made up of stressed and unstressed syllables. Rhythm. Rhythm is the beat created by meter, alliteration, and refrain. While rhythm is basic to poetry, rhyme is not. Rhyme. Rhyming words end in the same sounds, not necessarily the same letter. Example: tree, me, see, bit, flee. And rhyme. Rhyming words are at the end of a line. Example: tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, by William Blake. So here we have bright and night at the end of the line. Internal rhyme. Rhyming words are within the line. Example: once upon a midnight prairie, while I pondered, weak and weary, by Emily Dickinson. And here we have prairie and weary, which are within the line. Free verse. Free verse. Poetry. This is poetry that does not require meter or rhyme scheme. Stanza. Stanza is a division of a poem consisting of two or more lines arranged together. Stanzas in poetry are similar to paragraphs in prose. And stopped line. This is a break that comes at the end of a line, giving an autonomous sense to each line. Example: shall I compare thee to a summer's day? This is taken from Shakespeare's Sonnet 18. A pause or a break within the line is called caesura. Enjambment. Enjambment. Enjambment is the opposite of end stopped line. It is the incomplete syntax at the end of a line. For example, winter kept us warm, covering. Earth in forgetful, snow feeding. A little life with dried tubers. This is taken from T.S. Eliot's poem, The Waste Land. In this example, the first two lines are enjambed, whereas the last line is end stopped. The speaker. The narrative voice in a poem is called the speaker. And it is a convention in poetry that the feelings and thoughts expressed by the speaker are not necessarily the poet's. The speaker is also called the persona. Lyric poem. A lyric poem is a short, non-narrative poem of song-like quality. Elegies, odes, and sonnets are all examples of lyric poetry. Narrative poem. It is a poem that tells a story, often using elements of fiction, such as plot, setting, characters, and dialogue. Epics epitomize the genre. Dramatic poem. A dramatic poem is a poem that has a theatrical quality and that connects the reader to an audience. It is also known as dramatic verse or verse drama. Let us now move to figurative language. Figurative language is language that goes beyond the literal meaning of words. Authors use it as an artistic ornament to create vivid imagery in their literary works. The most common figures of speech are as follows. Alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of initial consonant sounds in neighboring words. For example, by baby. Assonance. Assonance is the repetition of similar vowel sounds within neighboring words. These vowels are preceded or followed by differing consonant sounds. Example, tight and mine have assonance, while tight and height have rhyme. Simile. Simile is an explicit comparison conveyed by the use of connective words, such as like or as. Example, he is as strong as a lion, or she is as strong as a lioness. Metaphor. Metaphor is an implied comparison conveyed without the use of connective words. Example, he is a lion or she is a lioness. Metonymy and Synecdoche are particular forms of metaphor. Metonymy is a figure of speech in which a person or thing is referred to by something closely associated with it. For example, crown stands for royalty. Synecdoche is the use of part to represent the whole. For example, I have 6 mouths to feed. Hyperbole. Hyperbole is an overstatement used for rhetorical effect, mainly emphasis. Example, I ate a ton of sugar today. Understatement. Understatement is the opposite of exaggeration. Example, saying a flesh wound to mean a severe infection or amputation. Litotes and euphemism are variants of understatement. Litotes is an ironic understatement. Example, to say, it is not the best weather today during a hurricane. Litotes must include a negative statement. Here we have, it is not. Euphemism. Euphemism is a deliberate understatement of something unpleasant. For example, saying, he passed away instead of he died. Pun. Pun is a funny play on words which are either similar sounding or have multiple meanings. For example, you were right, so I left. Or, the skeleton has nobody to talk to. Skeleton and no body. Personification. Personification is giving human qualities to non-human beings. Example, the sun is smiling. Apostrophe. Apostrophe is addressing an absent person or the dead as if they were present. Example, oh ghosts, leave the living alone. Onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia means using words that imitate sounds in nature. Example, crunchy, splash. To honk. Oxymoron. Oxymoron is combining two opposite words in a brief phrase. Example, a cold fire. Antithesis. Antithesis is juxtaposing contrasting ideas, usually in balanced phrases or clauses. Example, speech is silver, silence is gold. Paradox. Paradox is a seemingly contradictory statement that expresses truth. Example, the more we use social media, the less we communicate. Let us move now to poetic imagery. Like modern poets, contemporary poets are less likely to follow regular patterns of rhyme and meter. As you compare and contrast two poems, consider how they differ in style and form. Likewise, note how the poet's attitudes toward their themes may have been shaped by their literary periods. Imagery. Poetry, in essence, is imagery. Poets create colorful images by using sensory details that appeal to the senses of sight, hearing, taste, smell, or touch. Basically, there are 5 distinct types of imagery: visual, auditory, olfactory, gustatory, tactile, or kinesthetic. Imagery in literature helps draw readers in by allowing them to picture a scene and hence to construct a mental image of the overall setting and events. To sum it up, Imagery is the descriptive language that engages our senses. It is used by writers to help readers smell a scent, hear a sound, taste a flavor, feel temperature, or sense the texture of objects by touching them. Poets may thereby be regarded as painters who use a wide spectrum of vibrant words with a view to creating a sensory experience for their readers. Imagery reflects the poet's mood, style, and unique vision of the world. It also helps locate literary works in time and space. Literary synesthesia is the blending of senses in the same image. Example, her voice was pale. Now we'll move to the next part concerning the influence of Western modernism on Arabic poetry. Here we shall shed light on modern Arabic poetry as both the legacy of European modernism and a product of its specific context. Modern Arabic poetry was the most significant movement of its kind in the mid-20th century. It appeared in the Arab world under the influence of Western existentialism. It traces its origins back to the Arab Renaissance, Nahda, in the late 19th century and the first 3 decades of the 20th. In Lisan al-Arab by Ibn Mandur, the term Hadatha stands as the antonym of ancient. It refers to newness as opposed to oldness. The Arabic word al-Hadatha translates both English terms modernity and modernism. In Arabic literature, the term Hadatha refers to a conscious project of poetic innovation. It informs both the literary and artistic genres, but is mainly associated with poetry. It involves issues of form, content, and style. For centuries, classical Arabic poetry was dominated by the ode, al-qasida, an elaborately structured poem that celebrates a person, place, thing, or idea. The major break with tradition came in the wake of World War II. The political changes in the modern Arab world, including the creation of the State of Israel, the 1967 war, and the fall of Nasserism. All these factors triggered the quest for independence and the call for a committed literature where poetry plays key social roles. According to Adonis, one of the most influential Arab poets of the 20th century, literary modernism is an innovative experiment which challenges the sacred order of the linguistic system. It seeks to redefine the parameters of Arabic culture by moving the language in formally subversive ways, and is hence conceived as conducive to the expression of immanence. Arab poetic modernity sprang from both the influence of the Western modernist movement and the visceral urge of Arabic poetry for new methods and interpretations. Arab modernists thereby created new forms, whether poetic, narrative, or dramatic, through which to rethink the representation of consciousness, subjectivity, history, art, and human experience. Arabic modernism was a shock in the 1950s and 1960s, as suggested by Adonis in his major work, الثابت والمتحول, صدمة الثقافة, the static and the changing, the shock of modernity. published in 1978. But this shock is no longer so shocking. The new poets experienced all kinds of alienation, social, political, geographical, psychological, and spiritual. Spurred on by newness, many Arab modernists left their homelands either willingly or unwillingly. Examples of these are the Iraqi poets Badr Shakir Sayyab, Nazik al-Malaika, and Abd Wahab al-Bayati, the Syrian poets Nizar Qabbani and Adonis, the Palestinian poets Jabra Ibrahim Jabra and Mahmoud Darwish, and the Lebanese Gibran Khalil Gibran, Mikhail Naima, and Jawdat Haidar. The major themes of modernist poets are alienation, the city, and death. Albeit ancient, these themes are still current in both Arabic and European modern works. T.S. Eliot tackled these subjects in great depth in his two poems, The Waste Land, Al-Arabiyya Bab, and The Love Song of J. Alfred, Proof Rock. Sayyab, who was the pioneer force behind the free verse movement, expressed with equal intensity his alienation ordeal during his recovery in London. He says, يا غربة الروح في دنيا من الحجر والثلج والقار والفولاذ والدجر. O alienation of the soul in a world of stone, snow, tarmac, steel, and spleen. Poets' pathos is twisted around the metropolitan space in which they reluctantly live. The city was abhorred by many modernists, such as the Egyptian poet Ahmed Abdel-Mu'ti Hijazi and the Iraqi poet Badr Shakir Sayyab, whose village, Jaykur, is one of the most exalted places in Arabic poetry. In his poem, The Return to Jaykur, Al-Awda li Jaykur, he laments, أواه يا جيكور لو تسمعين أواه يا جيكور لو توجدين. O Jaykur, if you only knew. O Jaykur, if you were alive. Sayyab was one of the Timuzian poets who celebrate death as a stepping stone for new life. His poem, The Grave Digger, Hafar al-Qubur, unveils a gloomy image of the city through the depiction of a grave diver's misery. The lines below describe the grave diver's state after being asked to bury a courtesan he once dated. ويظل حفار القبور ينأى عن القبر الجديد متعثر الخطوات يحلم باللقاء وبالخمور. And the grave digger still stands at a distance from the new grave, stumbling, dreaming of promiscuity and wines. In another poem entitled The Blind Courtesan Al-Mumis al-Amya, Sayyab renders the ugliness of the city. His aversion looms powerfully. He bemoans, عمياء كالخفاش في وضح النهار هي المدينة والليل زاد لها عماها. Blind as a bat in daylight is the city, and the night has heightened its blindness. Alienation, death, and the city are thematically intertwined in another poem by Badr Shakir Sayyab, The Book of Job, Sifr Ayyub, where he paints London, morbidity, and promiscuity. في لندن الليل موت نزعه السهر والبرد والضجر وغربة في سواد الليل سوداء. In London, the night is agony, cold and dull, and alienation darkened by night. Other poets, however, celebrated the city as a source of inspiration. or their creative works. The Yemeni poet Abdelaziz Al-Maqalih, in poem 47 of his poetry collection, The Book of Sana'a, portrays his mythic town thusly: كانت امرأة هبطت في ثياب الندى ثم صارت مدينة. She was a woman. She came down dewy, then she became a city. At the end, the poet slightly modifies the opening lines, which hence become: كانت امرأة هبطت من ثياب الندى هطلت ثم صارت مدينة. She was a woman. She came down from the dew dress. She reigned. Then she became a city. The idea of the city as being dressed is significantly present in Romantic poetry. For instance, William Wordsworth, in composed Upon Westminster's Bridge, exalts London, saying, "This city now doth like a garment wear." Wordsworth was rather ambivalent toward the city, perceived as a locus of paradoxes and a reflection of the real world's ugliness. This wavering attitude is shared by the Egyptian poet Salah al-Sabur. Conversely, the loathing of the city displayed by T.S. Eliot is common to Al-Bayati and Badr Shakir Sayyab, who depict the city as ghost-ridden. The barrenness of the land echoes the waterlessness of the human soul. Arab poets were inspired by Eliot's incorporation of the Tamuzian fertility myth. Hence they were spurred to rediscover their antique myths: Adonis, Isis, and Osiris, Ishtar and Tammuz, and the like. By employing universal myths, symbols, and allusions, Arab poets reinvented the language of poetry, particularly metaphor and imagery. Sayyab's poem, Song of the Rain, Mshudatul Matar, best exemplifies the myth of sacrificial death and resurrection through the reviving rain and the coming of spring after winter. Arab modernist poets were influenced by Western rhetoric and poetics. In a hitherto elitist poetry, Eliot employs the everyday language. In The Wasteland, he shockingly evokes ordinary words or phrases, such as tea, breakfast, stove, slippers, stockings, and camisoles. Salah al-Sabur did the same in his poem, Melancholy al-Huzn. In the context of the 1950s, this mundaneness came very close to ridicule. al-Sabur says, ورجعت بعد الظهر في جيبي قروش فشربت شايا في الطريق. I returned in mid-afternoon with pennies in my pocket. On the way, I drank tea. ورتقت نعلي, and had my shoes fixed. Sayyab's poetic modernity manifests itself in a seemingly spontaneous, yet artfully crafted way. His poem, From Foucault's Vision, Min Ru'ya Foucault, is very revealing in this regard. He says, الصين حقل شاي وسوق شنغاي يعج بالمزارعين قبل كل عيد. China is a tea field, and the Shanghai market is teeming with farmers before every feast. By the same token, the modern elements introduced by Syrian poet and diplomat Nizar Qabbani, such as coffee beans, sugar, newspaper, cigarettes, nighties, the debka, the mawad, the kufiya, etc., abolish the distance between words and things, between poetry and reality. Qabbani's poems, which had abandoned the semantic and technical aesthetics conventions of the Arabic literary tradition, were performed by refined Arab singers such as Kadhib al-Sahir and Majd al-Rumi, and these lyricized poems have sensitized the general public to the timeless themes of love and desire. Thank you very much for your attentive listening. Blessed be.